Hello, welcome to ELA 9 Distance Learning, a YouTube lesson series on argumentative essay writing with me, Mr. Smith. Today we're going to be talking about revision. Revision, as we know, is to see our draft again. We're not going to spend a ton of time going back and reviewing our series schedule because we've done that in every video, and I also just want to make sure that we understand that we have, these few videos left which are going to be, more review in nature because we've done these with our writing in the past. So I just really want to get into it, right? Revision, as we know, getting into our video here, number 9, is to see again. We're talking about revision. So what I want you to think about and where you should be right now is you've completed your outline, you've completed your graphic organizer, you've done your research, which we talked about in our last video, and you've done really all the parts of your rough draft. So hopefully you should be sitting there and thinking, wow, I have to fix this to make it as good as it can be before I write my final copy. And I've got, at this point right now, about a week to do that. So what do I need to do? Well, that's where we are right now. I'm going to give you some tips and some recommendations and some suggestions for what you can do sitting at home now with a rough draft that's either most of the way done or partially done or completely done to make it from a 60 to a 70 or an 80 or a 70 to a 90 or whatever. It's just taking the writing that you have and making it be as good as it can be. And that's our point. Revision is taking our writing and making it better. So when we think about our tips here, the first thing I want to do is clarify. In the bottom, we see here the source. I'm getting this information from Purdue OWL, right? A lot of this information, there's a little bit of adjustment that I'm making and adding some stuff. I've cut some stuff, I've made some adjustments, but this is coming from the source of Purdue OWL, which is the online writing lab for Purdue University. I want to make sure that it's clear that you know that this information is not mine. This is information that I'm getting from them, because in our presentation here, we're going to talk about sourcing, and if you are going to use somebody else's source, you have to make sure that you provide clarification on that. We're going to talk about that, but I want to make sure that I'm doing that as well. I'm not going to be a hypocrite. So the first thing when we talk about this is we want to make sure when we revise and we sit back down, we finish our rough draft, we took it for a break, and then we come back, what's our main point? Can we clearly see what our thesis is? Can we clearly find the evidence that supports that thesis? Do we have everything that we need? If you can't tell me immediately by looking at your draft what your thesis is, then guess what? Then I won't be able to tell you what your thesis is. So you need to know immediately, going back into your essay, first of all, what the thesis is, and you should know by now probably where it should be, right? The recommendation from me, strong recommendation, is that the thesis is going to be the last sentence of your introduction. I'm going to look at most people's and I'm going to look back to the last sentence of your introduction, unless somebody's already had a conversation with me to explain why it's not there. I'm going to look at the last sentence of the introduction, and that sentence should be their thesis statement. And what should lead up to there is the things from the introduction presentation that we've talked about, of maybe a question or a hook or a story or some background information or a statistic that then leads into that thesis statement, right? And then the next 2 paragraphs in the body, both of those body paragraphs are just, a topic sentence, which is one reason, with the evidence and the explanation. And then they do that again. Another topic sentence, which is another reason. For example, if I'm saying that Coke is better than Pepsi, going back to that example, one reason why Coke is better than Pepsi is because of the taste. And then here's a piece of evidence that supports it. And then I explain that piece of evidence. Another reason why Coke is better than Pepsi is because of the sales. And then I find a piece of evidence from the internet based off of my research video we just watched and just did. And then I explain that. Then I do my counter-argument paragraph, and then I have my conclusion. Now, if I go in and I look back through and I have no idea what the point of my essay is because I don't know what the thesis is, then that's the first thing we have to fix. I need to know clearly what your thesis is. I need to know clearly what you're trying to prove and what the opponent is going to say about that. Because if I don't, then you've got a problem, because then we don't know what your essay is about. That's the most important thing. So once you've got that squared away, and for most people, that's pretty much set. It's given. They know what their thesis is and they know what their evidence is. Once we've got that down, then we got to go through and evaluate our evidence. Do you have strong evidence? Do you have enough evidence? Does your evidence support your thesis? And if you are using evidence? Are you doing it in a way that's correct? As we just noticed on the last slide, I provided my source for my information. Now, I'm not going to ask for a works cited page. I'm not going to ask for a list of your citations. I don't want that. It's not fair for us. If we were going to do this in school, then I would have gone through this. But for now, the only thing I'm going to ask is if you are using information from a source on the internet and you are taking something directly from that source, directly, like every word, then you need to put quotations around what you're taking. If you are quoting something directly off the internet, put quotation marks around it. That's all you have to do. If I go and I'm reading your paper and something looks, doesn't look like you wrote that. It looks like somebody else wrote that. And I search and I find out that in my reading and then looking on the internet, and I find that this information from your paper, there's no quotation marks on it, but it's on the internet somewhere else exactly as it's written in your paper word for word. I want to make sure that that's clear. That's plagiarism. Plagiarism is you taking somebody else's words and saying that they're your own, right? You took them off of the internet and you put them in your paper and you didn't put quotes around them. Now, years from now, when you're in later years in high school or in college, that can get you in a lot of trouble. But here now, you'll just lose points. I'm just going to say that that's going to be something that you're going to lose points for. So the only way that you can get away from it, and the easiest way to get away from it, is really a couple different things. One, quote it, or two, just don't use the words exactly as they're written on the internet. Just read it, understand what it's saying, and then just paraphrase it. Put it in your own words. That's what I would suggest. So when we think about this, look back. What are you trying to prove? If I'm trying to prove that Coke is better than Pepsi, right? And my first paragraph is about how Coke tastes better, evidence. My second paragraph is Coke sells better, right? And then I have this fact randomly here about the can being red. Huh? That doesn't relate back to my thesis. Huh? What? Now I've got two choices. One, I can change my thesis, which is fine. You can change your thesis. Or two, cut the idea. Just get rid of it. Now, a lot of people, and I'm going to talk about this, it relates to this one, it relates to the next tip as well. A lot of people don't like to cut their writing. They think their writing is so good that they don't want to make edits. They don't want to cut things. You have to cut things sometimes, right? Because it makes your writing better. If you cut things, then you can add better stuff to it. But the problem that some students have is they're like, no, I'm not cutting anything. It's perfect. I love it the way it is. No, sometimes you have to cut stuff, right? And that's what we're talking about here. If there's an idea that doesn't fit, then it's not proving your thesis and it's actually hurting your grade. So by cutting information out, you're probably going to raise your grade up. So think about that when you're revising. Also, tighten up the language, right? Are there sentences that don't make sense? Are there phrases that are awkward? Are there ideas that are unclear? Do you have language that just is extra, right? When I say extra words, sometimes people will say things like, I think that. You don't have to tell me that's what you think, right? I say this to students all the time. I think that Coke is better than Pepsi. So just cross out, I think that. I know it's what you think. Your name's on the paper. I know it's not what she thinks. It's not what he thinks. It's what you think because your name's up there. So just cross that out. You don't need those extra words. That's just wasteful. By crossing those words out and not putting in there, your grade will be higher. Stuff like that. And then also, grammar, spelling, punctuation, things that are just common, right? When we think about those types of things, those are things that we know. Like, does the period go in that right spot? Are we having run-on sentences? Are we having the punctuation inside of the quotation, which is a mistake a lot of students make. If I'm using quotation marks, so for example, I'll show you right here. If this was gonna be quotes, say for example, I was putting this as quotes, right? This punctuation, some students will put this here. They'll put the quotation mark, question mark on the outside. That would not go there. Instead, I'd say the easiest way to remember it is punctuation inside quotation. So punctuation goes first, right? So that's how you would do it. And then finally, the easiest thing, actually it's not finally, I got one more. This one's just a little more challenging. you want to think, when we write, we think about ourselves. We don't think about the reader. So we write the whole piece about ourselves. And what we want to do is, after we've written it, now we can detach ourselves from it because we've written it. Now we want to think about the person who's going to be reading it. So we want to switch from what we call writer-centered to reader-centered. And what that means is you want to focus on what can be said to make the reader understand it more. You write it from your perspective, from your point of view, and it's easy for you to understand. But like, I'm going to be reading this. I might not understand something the way you do. So you have to, as it says here, make your paper more successful. How could a part be made clearer, made better? What could be things that are said that are a little bit easier for the reader to understand, and not said in such a way where you get them, but the reader doesn't get them? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about changing the way in which it's written to make it better for the reader and not better for you as the writer, if that makes sense. And ultimately, if you're still struggling, use people around you, right? When all else fails, you've got help, meaning you've got peers, you've got probably people at home, right? I would always recommend somebody who probably got a higher grade in school, right? So for example, I might, as an English teacher, talk to other English teachers. I would say, hey, Mr. Austin, Ms. Daviel, can you take a look at this paper for me? Mr. Zalesnik, can you read this for me and tell me what you think? And if I don't have access to any of them, because maybe I don't, I might text the paper to Mr. Petranchik or Mr. Sturpey. Hey, can you take a look at this and tell me, and look at this for the content. Does it do the assignment right? Or is the spelling good? Or a little brother, or older brother, or older sister, or cousin, somebody. I know we can't access a lot of people around us, but that doesn't mean we can't access them at home. It doesn't mean if we have technology that we can't use things like FaceTime or Zoom. I'm available as I have been in the past on Tuesdays and Fridays for people. So if you're struggling with your paper and you want to bring it on Zoom and say, hey, Mr. Smith, and then hold it up, or some people have been through talking points, messaging them to me, and I've been getting them feedback. I've gotten 2 or 3 people that I've already given feedback to, and it's great. That's the easiest thing I would suggest, is doing it that way. And then at that point, once you've gone through that revision, then you're at the point where you can start turning it into a final copy. So hopefully these are the things that people can use for revision. If you have questions, again, feel free to reach out to me. But keep on working. Have a good one.